The message arrived on a Tuesday morning at exactly 800 hours Earth Standard Time and changed everything humanity thought they knew about their place in the galaxy. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the holographic display flicker to life with alien symbols that slowly transformed into readable text as the translation algorithms worked their magic, and the words that appeared made his blood run cold. The galactic hegemony had spoken, and their message was simple and terrifying in its directness. All human colonies beyond the Sol system would be surrendered within 72 hours, or the entire human species would face complete annihilation, and there would be no negotiations and no compromises, and no second chances. Commander Lisa Parker rushed onto the bridge with intelligence reports streaming in from every corner of human space, and her face was pale as she handed Morrison the preliminary analysis of what they were facing. 300 alien ships had emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system, and they were massive vessels unlike anything in the human fleet, with energy signatures that dwarfed Earth's most powerful battleships, and they were just waiting like patient predators while the clock counted down. Captain Rick Hayes burst through the bridge doors with his flight suit still dripping with coolant from his fighter's emergency landing, and his voice cracked with exhaustion as he reported what his reconnaissance squadron had discovered during their desperate scouting mission. The aliens had technology that made human ships look like toys, and their shields could absorb direct hits from nuclear warheads without even flickering, and their weapons could slice through human armor like it was made of paper. Dr. Amy Collins appeared on the main screen from her laboratory deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, and her normally calm demeanor had been replaced by frantic energy as she explained what her team had been working on in secret for the past 5 years. Projects that were too dangerous to test and weapons that violated every treaty humanity had ever signed with other species and technologies that could destroy entire star systems if they went wrong. But now, none of that mattered, because extinction was knocking at their door. Morrison listened to each report and felt the weight of 7 billion human lives pressing down on his shoulders, while President Helen Rodriguez contacted him from the underground command center in Colorado. The president's voice was steady, but Morrison could hear the fear underneath as she authorized the use of every classified project and every forbidden technology and every desperate measure that their scientists and engineers had ever dreamed up. Engineer Pete Davis worked frantically in the Defiance's engine room, modifying their power systems to handle the experimental weapons that were being loaded onto every human ship in the fleet, and his hands moved with practiced precision even as sweat dripped down his face. The aliens had made their calculations based on humanity's known technology and their observed military capabilities and their previous encounters with other species who had faced similar ultimatums and always surrendered when faced with overwhelming odds. What they had not calculated was what happens when you corner a species that has spent its entire evolutionary history fighting for survival on a world that tried to kill them every single day. Morrison walked through the ship's corridors and saw his crew preparing for what everyone knew was likely a suicide mission, and yet there was no panic and no despair, and no talk of surrender. Commander Greg Adams supervised the loading of quantum torpedoes that existed only in theoretical papers until 3 days ago, while Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake coordinated with resistance cells on the outer colonies who refused to evacuate. The aliens sent another message after 24 hours had passed, and this time their tone was slightly less confident, as they reported unexpected human activity across multiple systems. Human ships were not retreating toward Earth as expected, but instead were moving into attack formations and broadcasting defiant messages across all communication channels. Captain Tony Miller launched his carrier UES Valkyrie from Luna Base, while Colonel Dan Foster prepared the moon's defensive installations and Major Kate Sullivan positioned her Marines for what everyone knew would be a desperate last-stand squadron. Leader Beth Johnson led her fighter wing through modifications that would have been considered insane under normal circumstances, but these were not normal circumstances, and sanity had become a luxury humanity could no longer afford. Dr. Collins transmitted new weapon specifications to every human ship and installation, while Paula Green worked around the clock to implement the modifications that would turn cargo haulers into mobile missile platforms and civilian transports into electronic warfare vessels. The aliens watched these preparations with growing confusion, because in their experience conquered species spent their final hours in prayer or panic or desperate attempts at negotiation, But humans were doing none of these things. Instead, humans were sharpening their knives. Morrison stood before the main display, showing the countdown timer with 18 hours remaining. And he thought about his daughter on Mars and his parents on Europa, and the billions of humans across dozens of worlds who were depending on decisions made by people who had never expected to fight a war of extinction. President Rodriguez appeared on screen one final time to deliver. Humanity's response to the alien ultimatum and her words were broadcast simultaneously to every human settlement and every alien ship in the solar system. The message was brief and spoken in the calm voice of someone who had already made peace with whatever consequences would follow. To the galactic hegemony, we acknowledge receipt of your ultimatum, and we have prepared our response, and our answer is this, and you may tell your masters that humanity does not kneel, and we do not surrender, and we do not go quietly into whatever dark future you have planned for us. The timer continued counting down towards 0, while human ships moved into positions that defied conventional military doctrine, and alien commanders tried to understand why their overwhelming display of force had not produced the expected result. Admiral Morrison looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew and saw determination where there should have been despair and readiness, where there should have been panic. And he realized that perhaps the aliens had made a fundamental error in their calculations. They had threatened a species that had crawled out of caves and built starships, and they had given an ultimatum to creatures who had spent millennia fighting wars against impossible odds and somehow finding ways to win. The final message from Earth was transmitted on all frequencies just as the 72-hour deadline expired, and it reached every corner of human space simultaneously. You started this war, and now you will regret it. The first alien attack began at dawn Earth time with a coordinated assault on Luna Base that lit up the dark side of the moon, with explosions that could be seen from Earth's surface with the naked eye. Colonel Dan Foster watched from the command center as 3 massive alien dreadnoughts emerged from hyperspace directly above the lunar surface, and their weapons began carving through the base's outer defensive shields, like they were made of tissue paper. Major Kate Sullivan led her Marines through the underground tunnels as the surface installations exploded one by one above their heads, and she could feel the moon shaking beneath her boots with each impact from the alien bombardment. The defense grid that humanity had spent decades building was being systematically destroyed, but Foster had one advantage the aliens did not expect, and that was the fact that humans had never built anything without planning for its destruction. Hidden transmitters throughout the base were recording every detail of the alien attack and broadcasting the data to Admiral Morrison's fleet, and more importantly, to Dr. Amy Collins, who was analyzing the enemy weapons in real time. Captain Tony Miller launched the UES Valkyrie from the far side of the A moon just as the alien ships moved into orbital bombardment position, and his fighter squadron spread out in formation patterns that no sane military commander would ever approve. Squadron leader Beth Johnson led the first wave of human fighters in what appeared to be a standard attack run until the very last moment, when her pilots did something that shocked both the aliens and their own command structure. Instead of breaking off when their weapons proved ineffective against alien shields, the human pilots kept flying straight toward the enemy ships and activated their emergency beacons, which were actually detonation codes for nuclear warheads that had been secretly installed in every fighter. The first kamikaze attack in space warfare caught the aliens completely off guard, and 3 of their escort vessels were destroyed by pilots who chose death over defeat, and whose final transmissions were variations on the same theme of defiance. Admiral Morrison watched the tactical display as red dots representing human fighters winked out of existence one by one, but took alien ships with them, and he felt something cold settle in his stomach as he realized this was only the beginning. Dr. Collins transmitted new weapons data to every human ship as her computers finished analyzing the alien shield frequencies, and Paula Green immediately began implementing modifications that would allow human weapons to penetrate the enemy defenses. The aliens regrouped after losing 7 ships to suicide attacks and began broadcasting surrender demands on all human frequencies, while their commanders tried to understand why humans were using tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Commander Greg Adams led a boarding party aboard a captured alien transport using breach pods that were essentially guided missiles with life support systems, And when the aliens saw humans cutting through their hull with plasma torches, they experienced something new: fear the Vorthak. Warriors were 8 feet tall with natural armor and claws that could tear through steel. But they had never fought an enemy that simply refused to acknowledge when it was beaten, and continued fighting even when mortally wounded. Adams and his team fought their way through the alien ship room by room and corridor by corridor, and when the Vorthak tried to gas them, the humans simply sealed their helmets and kept fighting, and when the aliens tried to depressurize sections, the humans used their suits' emergency systems and kept fighting. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake coordinated the intelligence gathering from the captured alien vessel, while Chief Engineer Roy Cooper began the dangerous process of reverse engineering alien technology, using tools and methods that would have been considered crude by galactic standards. The breakthrough came when Cooper discovered that alien shields operated on rotating frequencies that could be predicted if you had enough processing power, and Dr. Collins immediately began developing weapons that could synchronize with these frequency changes. Captain Nick Parker commanded the UES Phoenix as it became the first human ship to successfully penetrate alien shields using the new synchronization technology, and his target was one of the massive alien dreadnoughts that had been systematically destroying human defensive positions. The Phoenix was a fraction of the size of the alien vessel, but it carried experimental weapons that existed nowhere else in the galaxy, and when Parker gave the order to fire, the results exceeded every projection. The alien dreadnought's shields collapsed, and its hull began to buckle under impacts from weapons that should not have been possible, and its crew sent panicked messages to the Fleet Command asking for immediate assistance. Dr. Ellen Moore worked frantically to decode alien communications, while her team intercepted thousands of messages between enemy ships, and what they discovered changed everything about how humanity understood the war they were fighting. The galactic hegemony was not a unified alliance, but rather an empire built on conquest and fear, where dozens of species served their Vorthak masters not out of loyalty, but because they had no choice. Commander Jim Anderson immediately began psychological warfare operations designed to exploit these divisions, and his broadcasts were transmitted on alien frequencies using captured communication equipment. The messages were simple and direct and aimed at the enslaved species fighting alongside the Vorthak, and they offered alliance with humanity against their common oppressors. Captain Alex Mitchell led the first deep space raid using a captured alien vessel crewed entirely by humans who had learned to operate the foreign technology through trial and error and desperate necessity. The target was an alien supply convoy moving through hyperspace toward the Sol system, and Mitchell's attack revealed something crucial about their enemies. The galactic hegemony's logistics network was based on the assumption that their supply lines would never be threatened, and their cargo ships were lightly defended because no conquered species had ever mounted effective resistance. Mitchell's raiders destroyed 17 supply ships and captured enough alien technology to equip 3 more human vessels with enemy weapons and shields, and more importantly, they proved that the aliens could be hurt. Commander Diane Carter coordinated follow-up raids using the captured alien vessels, and her tactics were based on the simple principle that if the enemy expected civilized warfare, then humanity would give them something else entirely. The aliens began reinforcing their supply convoys, but this meant pulling ships away from frontline combat, and their attacks on human positions became less coordinated and less effective. Admiral Morrison received reports from across the solar system as the battle for humanity's survival entered its second week, and the casualty reports made for grim reading Luna Base had fallen, but not before transmitting complete intelligence on alien weapons and tactics, and Major Sullivan's Marines had held out for 6 days after the base was supposedly destroyed. Earth's orbital platforms had been reduced to debris, but their automated systems continued broadcasting false signals that confused alien targeting systems and bought precious time for civilian evacuations. The outer colonies were sending desperate messages requesting evacuation, but Morrison knew there were no ships available for rescue missions because every human vessel was needed for the fight. President Rodriguez appeared on secure channels with authorization codes for weapons that existed only in the deepest Black Project files, and her voice carried the weight of impossible decisions. Use everything we have built, and everything we have hidden, and everything we have feared to create, because extinction is worse than any consequence we might face for breaking the rules of civilized warfare. Morrison looked at the tactical display showing alien reinforcements arriving hourly, while human numbers dwindled, and he understood that conventional tactics would not save his species. The aliens had superior numbers and technology and firepower, but they also had something else that humanity could exploit. They had never fought an enemy that treated death as just another weapon to be used against them. The alien reinforcements arrived 3 weeks after the first battle, and brought with them ships from 12 different sectors of the galactic hegemony, along with commanders who specialized in crushing stubborn resistance movements. Admiral Luke Thompson assumed command of human forces after Morrison's heroic sacrifice, when the Defiance rammed an alien command ship in a desperate attempt to break their battle line, and his first order was to evacuate all non-essential personnel from Earth's remaining orbital stations. The new alien fleet commander was Vorthak Supreme General Krex, who had conquered 47 species over his long career, and who believed that humans simply needed to see enough of their ships destroyed to understand the futility of continued resistance. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake studied intelligence reports from captured alien communications and discovered that Krex had never encountered a species that employed suicide tactics as standard military doctrine, and this lack of experience would become his greatest weakness. Chief Engineer Roy Cooper worked around the clock to produce hybrid weapons using captured alien technology, combined with human engineering principles that prioritized effectiveness over safety or elegance. The UES Phoenix under Captain Nick Parker became the testbed for these experimental weapons, and his ship was essentially rebuilt from the inside out, with alien power systems feeding human weapons that exceeded all safety specifications. Dr. Ellen Moore's team achieved a breakthrough in alien code breaking when they discovered that different species in the hegemony used different encryption methods, and many of the client races were using systems that were decades out of date. Commander Jim Anderson immediately exploited this intelligence gap by broadcasting surrender offers directly to ships crewed by enslaved species and offering them freedom in exchange for defection from the Vorthak forces. The first defection came from a Kalari cruiser whose captain had watched his homeworld burned during the initial Vorthak conquest, and who saw an opportunity for revenge against his former masters. Captain Rachel Davis led the operation to accept the defecting alien. Vessel and her boarding party discovered that the Kalari crew had been planning their rebellion for months, while waiting for the right opportunity. The intelligence provided by the Kalari defectors revealed critical weaknesses in Vorthak command structure, and more importantly showed that several client species were actively sabotaging their own ships during combat operations. Admiral Thompson authorized the formation of mixed human-alien crews using defectors from multiple species, and these hybrid vessels began conducting operations that confused Vorthak commanders who could not understand why their own ships were attacking them. Captain Alex Mitchell expanded his raiding operations using a growing fleet of captured and defected alien vessels, and his targets shifted from supply convoys to communication relays and command posts. The psychological warfare campaign began showing results when entire squadrons of client species ships started broadcasting surrender messages and requesting asylum with human forces. Dr. Amy Collins completed development of humanity's most dangerous weapon after 6 months of non-stop work, and the device was something that had never been tested because the theoretical projections suggested it could destroy entire star systems. The Star Killer weapon operated by destabilizing the nuclear fusion processes in stellar cores, and the energy release would be sufficient to sterilize every planet within 50 light-years of the target star. President Rodriguez authorized construction of 3 Star Killer devices, despite protests from Dr. Collins, who warned that using such weapons would make humanity no better than their enemies. Admiral Thompson disagreed with the president's assessment and argued that survival took precedence over moral concerns, and that the aliens had started a war of extinction. So, humanity had the right to respond with any means necessary. Commander Steve Johnson's deep space reconnaissance discovered the main Vorthak staging area in the Proxima Centauri system, where hundreds of alien ships were gathering for what appeared to be a final assault on Earth. The staging area was protected by automated defense platforms and patrol fleets, but intelligence from Kalari defectors revealed that the entire facility was dependent on a single command nexus that coordinated all defensive operations. Captain Maria Lopez volunteered to lead the suicide mission that would attempt to destroy the alien staging area using the first Starkiller device, and her crew was composed entirely of volunteers who understood they would not survive the operation. Commander Jake Sullivan coordinated with alien rebels throughout hegemony space to time simultaneous uprisings that would occur when the Starkiller weapon was deployed and stretch Vorthak forces beyond their ability to respond effectively. The Kalari resistance cells had been preparing for this moment since their homeworld was conquered, and they possessed detailed intelligence on Vorthak military installations throughout their former territory. Finarian rebels had been sabotaging Vorthak logistics networks for years and were ready to escalate their operations to open warfare when the signal came. From human forces, Dr. Moore's psychological warfare, broadcasts reached every corner of hegemony space and carried the same message that humans had proven alien defeat was possible and that freedom was within reach for any species brave enough to fight. The Vorthak High Command began experiencing something they had not felt in centuries of conquest, and that was genuine concern about the stability of their empire. Reports flooded in from across their territory describing uprisings and defections, and supply line attacks and communication disruptions and ship crews that refused to follow orders. Supreme General Krex requested additional reinforcements from the Vorthak homeworld, but was informed that all available ships were being deployed. To suppress rebellions in conquered territories, Admiral Thompson realized that humanity had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history, and had turned a war of conquest into a war of liberation that was spreading faster than the Vorthak could contain. The climactic battle began when Captain Lopez's mission reached the Proxima Centauri system, and her ship, the UES Retribution, approached the massive alien staging area under cover of electronic warfare systems developed from captured alien technology. Lopez transmitted her final message to Admiral Thompson as her ship penetrated the outer defensive perimeter, and her words were recorded for posterity. Tell Earth that we kept our promise, and that humanity does not surrender and does not forget and does not forgive. The Starkiller device activated successfully, and the artificial stellar instability began cascading through Proxima Centauri's fusion core, while every alien ship in the system received the same broadcast, on all frequencies. You started this war, and now you see what happens when you threaten humanity. The destruction of the Proxima Centauri staging area eliminated 300 alien ships and sent shockwaves throughout the galactic hegemony as species across dozens of systems realized that humans possessed weapons capable of destroying stars. Rebel uprisings erupted simultaneously on 47 worlds as the news spread, and Vorthak forces found themselves fighting multiple wars across their entire empire, while their main fleet remained trapped in the Sol system. Admiral Thompson received intelligence reports showing that the galactic hegemony was fragmenting as client species declared independence and former allies began attacking Vorthak installations. The war that had started as humanity's last stand had become something else entirely. A revolution that was tearing apart an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years. And it was just the beginning. 6 months into the war, the casualty reports painted a picture that should have meant total human defeat, but instead showed something that confused every military analyst in the galaxy. The galactic hegemony controlled most human colonies and had destroyed 2/3 of Earth's fleet, but their own losses exceeded every projection and their empire was collapsing from internal rebellions. Admiral Luke Thompson commanded human forces from the rebuilt UES Defiance, and his strategic situation. Reports showed that conventional victory was impossible, but that humanity was winning anyway. The Vorthak had lost more ships fighting humans than they had lost conquering the previous 20 species combined, and their client races were defecting. At an accelerating rate, Captain Rachel Davis prepared for the most dangerous mission in human history, while her crew made final preparations to deploy the second Starkiller weapon against the Vorthak homeworld itself. The moral implications of destroying an entire star system with billions of inhabitants weighed heavily on Davis, but she had seen the orbital bombardment footage from human colonies and knew what mercy the aliens had shown. Commander Steve Johnson's reconnaissance had located the Vorthak home system deep in the galactic core, where it was protected by automated defense networks that no enemy had ever penetrated. Dr. Amy Collins transmitted the final technical specifications for the Starkiller deployment, while her conscience screamed at what humanity was preparing to do. The weapon would need to be delivered directly to the Vorthak sun, and the approach through their defensive perimeter would require sacrifices that made previous suicide missions look like training. Exercises President Helen Rodriguez gave the final authorization despite knowing that history would judge her for authorizing genocide, but also knowing that the alternative was human extinction. Admiral Thompson coordinated with rebel forces throughout hegemony space to ensure maximum disruption when the Starkiller mission began, and the response from alien rebels exceeded all expectations. The Kalari had assembled a fleet of stolen Vorthak ships, crewed by former slaves who wanted nothing more than to see their oppressors destroyed. Phanarian rebels controlled 3 industrial worlds and were producing weapons specifically designed to kill Vorthak warriors. In hand-to-hand combat, Zephyrian resistance cells had infiltrated the Vorthak communication networks and were ready to broadcast surrender demands to every ship in the enemy. Fleet Commander Jim Anderson's psychological warfare had evolved into direct military coordination with rebel forces, and his operations center had become the de facto command post for the Galactic Revolution. Dr. Ellen Moore intercepted Vorthak communications that revealed panic, spreading through their high command as they struggled to understand how a single species had destabilized their entire empire. The intercepted messages showed that Vorthak reinforcements were being recalled from the Sol system to suppress rebellions throughout their territory. Captain Tony Miller led the carrier UES Valkyrie in hit-and-run attacks against the retreating alien forces, and his fighter squadrons reported that enemy morale was collapsing. Squadron leader Beth Johnson coordinated with hybrid human-alien crews who were using captured Vorthak vessels to attack their former masters, and the psychological impact was devastating. Engineer Pete Davis worked to modify captured alien ships for human use, while also training rebel crews to operate weapon systems that had been designed specifically to oppress them. The irony was not lost on anyone that slaves were now using their masters' tools to fight for freedom. Admiral Thompson received a message from the Vorthak Emperor himself, requesting negotiations and offering territorial concessions in exchange for ending human aggression. The human response was delivered by President Rodriguez in a transmission broadcast across the entire galaxy, and her words marked the moment when the war changed from defensive to offensive. The galactic hegemony offered us slavery or death, and we chose neither, and now we offer you the same choice you gave us and surrender, or face the consequences of your actions. Captain Davis launched her mission toward the Vorthak homeworld, while rebel fleets across the galaxy began coordinated attacks on remaining hegemony installations. The UES Retribution carried not just a Starkiller weapon, but also broadcasting equipment that would transmit humanity's final message to every species in the Galaxy Commander. Greg Adams led escort fighters that would attempt to clear a path through the Vorthak defensive perimeter, while knowing that none of them would survive the mission. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake coordinated intelligence operations that guided the strike force through hyperspace routes mapped by rebel sympathizers within the Vorthak military. The journey to the galactic core took 3 weeks, and during that time the rebellion spread to every corner of hegemony. Space as species after species declared independence. Captain Alex Mitchell reported that entire sectors were now under rebel control, and that Vorthak forces were conducting strategic withdrawals toward their homeworld commander. Diane Carter's raiders had evolved into a proper fleet that included vessels from 12 different species, all united by their hatred of Vorthak oppression. The final approach to the Vorthak system began when Captain Davis received confirmation that rebel forces had disabled key defensive installations. The Kalari suicide squadrons had succeeded in destroying the outer sensor networks, while Phanarian saboteurs had introduced computer viruses into the automated defense systems. Chief Engineer Roy Cooper made final modifications to the Starkiller weapon, while the UES Retribution penetrated deeper into the most heavily defended system in the galaxy. Captain Nick Parker commanded the UES Phoenix as part of the escort force, and his experimental weapons proved capable of penetrating even the most advanced Vorthak shields. Dr. Collins monitored the Starkiller deployment from Earth, while calculating the exact moment when the weapon would need to be activated to achieve maximum effect. The Vorthak homeworld was a fortress world with orbital installations that could destroy entire fleets, but none of their defenses had been designed to stop a weapon that targeted their sun captain. Davis transmitted her final message as the UES Retribution approached the stellar deployment point, and her words carried the weight of 6 months of desperate warfare. This is Captain Rachel Davis of the United Earthship Retribution, to any Vorthak forces receiving this transmission, and your empire ends today because you made one mistake and you threatened humanity. The Starkiller weapon activated successfully and began the process that would destabilize the Vorthak sun within hours, while sending gravitational waves throughout their entire system. Every ship in the Vorthak home fleet received the same transmission simultaneously as their star began showing signs of instability. You started this war believing humans would surrender like every other species you conquered, but we are not like the others, and we do not forgive, and we do not forget, and we do not show mercy to those who threaten our children. The Vorthak Emperor broadcast an unconditional surrender offer on all frequencies while ordering the immediate evacuation of the home system. But Admiral Thompson's response showed that humanity had learned the same lesson. The aliens had taught them about the consequences of threatening an entire species. Your surrender is noted and rejected because extinction was the choice you offered us, and extinction is what you have earned. The Vorthak star went supernova 6 hours later, destroying their homeworld and their government and their dreams of eternal empire. And across the galaxy, former slaves looked up at the sky and saw the light from that distant explosion, the light of freedom. The supernova that destroyed the Vorthak homeworld was visible across half the galaxy, and its light carried a message that every species in known space understood without translation. The age of the galactic hegemony was over, and something new had taken its place. Admiral Luke Thompson received surrender offers from 43 different Vorthak commanders within hours of their homeworld's destruction. But humanity's response had already been decided. There would be no mercy for those who had offered extinction as their opening negotiation. President Helen Rodriguez addressed the galaxy from the rebuilt chambers of Earth's government, and her words were broadcast simultaneously to every inhabited world in their region of space. 2. The former subjects of the galactic hegemony, you are free, and to the former masters of the galactic hegemony, you will face justice, and to anyone who thinks humanity will return to being ignored, you have learned that we are not a species that forgets. Captain Maria Lopez led the Liberation Fleet toward the outer colonies that had been conquered during the first weeks of the war, and her ships carried weapons that surpassed anything the Vorthak had ever fielded. The technology was a hybrid of human engineering and alien science, improved by the desperate innovation that comes from fighting for survival, and refined by the practical experience of 6 months of total warfare. Commander Jake Sullivan coordinated with rebel forces across former hegemony space to establish new governments that would be allied with humanity rather than hostile to it. The Kalari were eager to form military partnerships after seeing what humans could accomplish when threatened, and their industrial capacity was placed at Earth's disposal. Finarian scientists shared their advanced medical technology with human researchers, while requesting access to the quantum weapon systems that had proven so effective against Vorthak armor. The Zephyrian hive minds offered their computational abilities to help humans analyze the vast databases of information captured from Vorthak installations. Dr. Ellen Moore established the Galactic Intelligence Coordination Center, where former enemies worked together to map the political landscape of a galaxy, suddenly freed from 1,000 years of oppression. Commander Jim Anderson discovered that dozens of species had been planning rebellions for centuries while waiting for someone powerful enough to lead them against their oppressors. The psychological profile of humanity that emerged from alien analysis showed why humans had succeeded where others had failed. Every other species in the galaxy had evolved on worlds that were relatively hospitable and had developed civilizations based on cooperation and resource sharing. Humans had evolved on a planet that spent millions of years trying to kill them, and had developed a civilization based on the principle that anything trying to destroy them must be destroyed first. Captain Tony Miller commanded the new UES Valkyrie, which incorporated alien technology with human tactical doctrine, and his ship was capable of defeating entire fleets that would have been overwhelming just months earlier. Squadron Leader Beth Johnson trained pilots from liberated worlds to fly fighters equipped with quantum weapons, and their enthusiasm for attacking their former oppressors exceeded even human standards. Engineer Pete Davis established shipyards throughout human space where vessels were being constructed, using design principles that combined the best elements of multiple alien technologies. The new human fleet was larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen, and more importantly, it was crewed by beings who had learned that freedom was worth any sacrifice. Dr. Amy Collins was appointed head of the Terran Research Directorate, with authority to investigate any technology that might be useful for defending humanity's new position. The third star, killer weapon, was disassembled after heated debate, but the plans were distributed to trusted allies with the understanding that some weapons were too dangerous to use, but too important to abandon. Admiral Thompson established Earth Command as the central authority for military operations throughout human space and former hegemony territory, with the mission of ensuring that no species would ever again face the choice between slavery and extinction. The new galactic order was based on the principle that aggression against any member world would be met with overwhelming retaliation from the combined fleets. Captain Nick Parker led exploration missions beyond the former boundaries of hegemony space, where other empires watched nervously as humanity's influence expanded. First contact protocols were revised to include the standard message that Earth was interested in peaceful trade and cultural exchange, but would respond to any threats with the total destruction of the threatening civilization. Chief Engineer Roy Cooper developed the plans for Earth's new orbital fortifications, which were designed to withstand attacks from any conceivable enemy force, while also serving as construction facilities for the expanding human fleet. The message was clear to anyone who might be considering aggression against humanity or their allies. Dr. Moore established communication networks that connected every liberated world with Earth and allowed for real-time coordination of military and economic activities across hundreds of light years. The former slaves had become willing partners in building something that had never existed before in galactic history. A confederation based on mutual defense rather than conquest, Captain Alex Mitchell was promoted to admiral and placed in command of the Rapid Response Fleet, whose mission was to demonstrate human military capabilities to any species that might be confused about the new balance of power. Commander Diane Carter established the Diplomatic Corps, which was responsible for negotiating trade agreements and military treaties with the hundreds of newly independent worlds. The negotiations were straightforward, because every species remembered what had happened to the Vorthak and understood that cooperation with humanity was preferable to the alternative. President Rodriguez was elected to serve as the first galactic coordinator, with authority to speak for all member worlds in matters of mutual defense and interstellar law. Her first official act was to establish the Extinction Prevention Treaty, which prohibited any species from threatening the complete destruction of another species under penalty of facing the same fate they had proposed. 5 years after the war ended, Admiral Thompson stood on the observation deck of the UES Defiance and watched construction ships building humanity's newest dreadnought in Earth orbit. The vessel was larger than any ship the Vorthak had ever built, and it carried weapons capable of sterilizing entire star systems, but its most important feature was the message painted on its hull in letters that could be read from orbit. Remember the choice you were given. Children throughout human space learned about the war in schools where they studied the importance of never backing down when faced with extinction, and never forgetting those who had threatened their families. The curriculum included tactical analysis of the major battles and strategic assessment of the decisions that had turned certain defeat into total victory. But the most important lesson was about the difference between fighting for conquest and fighting for survival. Species that fought for conquest would accept defeat when the cost became too high. Species that fought for survival would accept any cost rather than accept defeat. The galaxy had learned this lesson at the cost of an entire empire. Captain Rachel Davis was posthumously awarded the Medal of Galactic Liberation, and her final transmission became required study for military officers throughout human space. Tell Earth that we kept our promise, and that humanity does not surrender, and does not forget, and does not forgive. The memorial built in her honor included those words, along with the names of every human who had died during the war, and a simple inscription that served as humanity's permanent message to the galaxy. They started this war thinking we would surrender, and they learned that some species are too dangerous to threaten. Admiral Thompson's final log entry from the war was preserved in the Earth archives and read by every human child when they reached the age where they could understand its meaning. We were given a choice between slavery and death, and we chose to give our enemies the same choice, and they learned that humanity keeps its promises, especially the dark ones.